Throughout history, war has birthed barren wastelands, bringing devastation upon families, communities, countries, and even on those we call war heroes. Little wonder why anti-war activists often say, in war, there are no winners. But is this really the case? A now popular release from the Watson Institute, dated 13th of September 2021, claims that the Pentagon's spending on the war in Afghanistan cost the United States a mind-boggling $14 trillion. A significant portion of those spendings went to procurement from weapons and war machine manufacturers like Boeing, Raytheon, and the likes. But while the soldiers on both ends of the conflict stand off and civilian casualties get lost in the usual rhetoric, collateral damage, the big boys in their suits at these multi-billion-dollar corporations sign massive deals to provide yet more instruments of war. While they cash out massive figures, the American taxpayers watch their hard-earned money burnt off in sometimes pointless conflicts. According to American historian Wes Frank, the war in Iraq didn't make a lick of rational sense. How did we go from war for conflict's sake to defending your people, your country, and your values, to creating an entire industry around it? Just how far back does this warring cancer go? Well, it turns out the war might just be one of the oldest businesses on record. People were making bank out of battles and dollars out of world domination long before we had F-35s screaming through the skies, before the boom of cannons and the crack of rifles, before the first trebuchet launched its rock, heck, even before Christ walked the land of Nazareth. So let's take a walk down a few historic battlefields to uncover exactly how war became a multi-billion-dollar business. We've got our protective gear set up to ensure you don't get caught in the crossfire while we uncover shocking secrets about how war became a business. To suit up, gently engage that red button, the one that has subscribe written on it, and your helmet and vest will be activated. You know what they say, safety first. The first secret you're about to uncover is how the historic Big Daddy of wars contributed to institutionalizing the business aspect of war. So, let's dive right into it. Managing all aspects of war can be quite expensive if a nation has to train all her military to standard. Even if this happens, the training of the opposing nation also has to be factored into the equation. History recognizes certain groups that lived only to fight wars, and as such, had become professional warriors. These money-loyal warriors were, of course, the Mercenaries. An infamous nation that comes to mind whenever mercenaries are mentioned is Carthage. You see, the Carthaginian society was never the traditional regular society. They were crazy rich, thanks to their naval dominance over trade routes and key ports in the Mediterranean Sea, from the 4th to the 2nd century BC. Carthage will eventually end up in a 23-year-long war with Rome in the First Punic War. And in this war, Carthage employed heavy use of mercenaries, earning them a huge spotlight in history as a people who pretty much outsourced everything they could to foreigners. Now here's the good stuff. History often recognizes Rome as a big daddy of wars and conquering territories. After all, Rome conquered so many territories that historians even have a hard time listing out all the regions and lands taken over by Rome. You see, Rome employed a very rigid yet flexible military enrollment system. In situations of war, Rome operated a levy system, where every male citizen between the ages of 17 and 46 got enlisted to serve in the army. This made the Roman military a force to be reckoned with. Because of the Roman display of sheer might, one would think that they never employed the use of mercenaries, but this is actually far from the truth. Alongside the use of Rome's legion army, they employed mercenaries periodically. A good example of this was during the Second Punic War against Carthage's Hannibal. The long conflict resulted in several thousand casualties for Rome, and they eventually had to rely heavily on the use of mercenaries to supplement their depleting legion. But, folks, that's not all. It gets even better. At this time, there were already organized groups that specialized in going to war for other nations. For the right price, of course. One such group was the famous Gallic Auxiliaries, a quote-unquote noble group, originating from the Celtic tribes of Gaul, which is of course now modern-day France. They were often used and paid by Roman commanders or generals when needed. Yeah, noble group indeed. Guys, if you made it this far into the video, you're an absolute legend. Thank you so much. Your thirst for knowledge will be rewarded. We're going to let you in on a secret that will make you feel smarter than anyone else in the room when global politics is being discussed. Have you ever heard the America, democracy, and oil joke? You see, the joke suggests that America offers democracy to unsuspecting countries, and in turn finds a way to sway that country's oil reserves. Well, I wish it were a mere joke. You see, it comes from something hidden in history called the spoils of war, a term you may have perhaps come across before, and now you're going to find out exactly how it originated. In medieval Europe, around the 8th to the 15th century, the rise of feudalism gave birth to a social structure that bolstered the developments of professional warriors and weaponsmiths. You see, feudal lords, or landowners as the word implies, had to find a means of protection for their lands and subjects, or serfs. And just who do you think gave that protection? A set of the social structure referred to as the knights. More often, knighthood was passed on via heredity. These knights were trained from a young age in combat skills, horsemanship, and chivalric codes. If you're just hearing of the chivalric codes, it was what we refer to as the Knight's Code of Conduct. It involved the moral, religious, and behavioral ethics that a knight was meant to display at all times. The feudalist system also sponsored another major class of specialized weaponsmiths and armorers. It was their duty to craft the weapons. A prominent group that best fits this description were well known in the 14th to the 16th century, renowned for their mastery of plate armor crafting. These were the Milanese armorers of northern Italy. Some sources posit that at some point they perfected the technique of creating a lightweight yet highly durable plate armor. Some unverified sources tell us that they even had a strict guild system that helped them ensure quality control and protected their trade secrets, practically earning them some sort of quality-based monopoly. And you know what goes with monopolies: good old-fashioned, outrageous prices. Now, with a bunch of jacked-up combat warriors and a gaggle of money and influence-loving landowners, you got yourself a recipe that is excellent for an all-you-can-eat greed buffet. And so, the fighting begins. Oh, if you're dodging as many arrows and spears as I am, a sub to the channel would really mean the world to all of us here at Fiscal. Please, spare my life! I'm just the voice artist! Oh, that was horrible. Okay, let's get back to the battlefield. Some historians claim that feudalism wasn't solely about war and forceful takeovers, and you know what? They've got a valid point. The original intent revolved somewhere around agriculture, trade, and religious life. However, the concept of the spoils of war just wouldn't let that be the 100% truth. You see, in some major conflicts, the knights were sent to fight, die, and take over a piece of land. And by a piece of land, we mean a whole expanse of land. Whenever a battle is won, what do you think happens? Of course, the losers don't get to keep their valuable stuff or land. If they could, then what is the incentive for a fight in the first place? And that is exactly where the spoils of war phenomenon was born. Essentially, I claim I'm provoked by something awful you did. I come to your land, I defeat your fighters, and then I get to keep your stuff. Pretty much. Ever heard of the term land grabbing? This is the era that birthed that phenomenon. It still operates today, but in a much more subtle, modern sense. And by subtle, we mean door-kicking, guns-blazing, smoke-screaming, and don't forget, the key ingredient, a sprinkle of democracy. Medieval war movies often depict war as a hunger for glory, loyalty, and a good old-fashioned plunder. But there's more to it. At this point, capitalism was beginning to creep into the world system, and our mercenaries became more mercenary, pun entirely intended. They now wanted more money, and the rule of the highest bidder became widespread. It essentially meant that they owed no allegiance to any one country. These mercenaries evolved from mere ragtag groups to professionally organized combatants. A good example was the Landsknecht. They were German mercenaries known for their flamboyant attires and their mastery of pike and shot tactics. They demanded high pay, but they were renowned for their effectiveness. Another group with a similar portfolio was the Swiss pikemen. At some point, the approach of these mercenaries began to raise ethical concerns. Mercenaries might fight for opposing sides in the same conflict, potentially prolonging wars to gain more profits, or prioritizing personal gain over the cause itself. Come to think of it, you know what sounds a little bit familiar to that? Modern-day private military companies, PMCs. Anyways, these mercenaries had essentially turned war into businesses, churning out huge profits and gaining unparalleled popularity. And just what do you think happened next? Things were about to get bloodier. I mean tech, guns, and armored tank level bloodier. Totalitarian regimes like Nazi Germany and Fascist Italy in the 1930s led powerful countries like Britain, the US, France, and even Germany itself to increase their military spending, especially in the area of weapons development. World War II saw an unprecedented scale of warfare, pushing nations to develop and deploy new technologies at a breakneck pace. Radars, code-breaking machines like the Enigma, and long-range bombers gained prominence during the war. Everyone was in a race to develop technologies that could possibly outmaneuver and overpower the enemy's defenses. And as a result, studies in material science to get more durable lightweight materials gained popularity. People also began to troop into engineering to develop faster utility vehicles and better guidance systems. Eventually, the massive spending in war would birth the dominance of defense contractors and companies like Lockheed Martin, Boeing, and Raytheon. They were awarded massive contracts to develop and manufacture weapons, and boy, did the money rain. These contractors, thanks to government involvement, grew so big that their influence literally tied the hands of international governments. They began to determine the prices and gain political relevance. Indirectly, of course. This got so bad that even existing companies who had technologies with no primary military application began to find ways to adapt their expertise for war efforts. I mean, they couldn't let the big boys get all the fun and stack all the cash, could they now? They wanted a piece of that pie. Good examples were companies like Ford. They are car manufacturers who shifted production to create tanks and jeeps for the military. Bell Labs, which was originally a telephone technology company, played a huge role in developing radar technology during World War II. And the list quite literally goes on and on and on. Today, we see advanced anti-missile defense systems like Israel's Iron Dome, alongside laser technology capable of silently taking down targets with outrageous precision. The vested corporate interests only seem to get worse. But we've got to wrap this thing up, and we saved the best for last. Whenever the cost of war is mentioned, people often think about the billions of dollars burnt off in the process. But is this the true cost of war? From extensive research, I have reasons to say that the cost of war goes beyond the green papers into something priceless. As much as a lot of people share the argument that war is a necessary evil, it undoubtedly carries a heavy human cost that gets overshadowed by its portrayal as a strategic game. Beyond the immediate casualties, war inflicts lasting damage that can be felt across several generations. Think Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Civilians caught in the crossfire, people lose their hard-earned assets and face immense losses. Homes get destroyed, families get ripped apart, and don't even get me started on the long-term psychological trauma people have to live through. Just where in the Japanese mindset do you think the idea of Godzilla came from? And it's not just the civilians. Even the soldiers who survive the conflict can often end up with PTSD. And exposure to the massive amounts of toxins in war zones leads to sometimes irreversible damage. So let me ask you a question. How can we answer the ethical question of corporations getting involved in a profitable venture with so many brutal repercussions for humanity? When war becomes a business, the human cost is often disregarded. Companies that manufacture weapons and war machines prioritize profit over the lives lost through their products. Is it right to profit from human suffering? Should corporations be held accountable for the consequences of their products? Does the pursuit of profit cloud judgment and lead to unnecessary wars? And just what is the cost of one human life? These are colossal questions that we don't claim to have the answer to, but we would love to hear what you guys think to this in the comments below. To make things even worse, like it or not, war as a business is not going anywhere anytime soon. This is mainly because of something called the military-industrial complex. The modern military-industrial complex refers to the close relationship between the armed forces, defense contractors, and the political establishment. They form a powerful trio that wields significant influence. If you're wondering how this relationship works, it's really quite simple. Defense contractors spend heavily on lobbying politicians, ensuring continued government funding for military projects and new weapons systems. They are also secretly part of the funding of political parties to ensure that their guy gets to the throne. This, of course, creates conflicts of interests, as decisions are made to maximize individual profits over national security needs. But hey, the end justifies the means, doesn't it? Or at least, I'm sure that's what the lobbyists would say. Also, do we even want to get into foreign policy and how our governments get involved in international conflicts? I mean, we have only to look at the awful situation in Ukraine to see elements of what I'm talking about. According to the Center for Strategic and International Studies, the CSIS, as of April 2024, around $68 billion of the collective US aid packages to Ukraine were actually reinvested into the military-industrial complex in the US. You heard that right. Considering that total aid to Ukraine at that point in time was $113 billion, this means that somewhere in the region of 60% of all that support went straight into the pockets of the US corporations charged with making the weaponry and vehicles of war. It is a known fact that the US and the collective West has deliberately not supplied Ukraine with everything it needs, but rather eked the support out, delivering more like just the right amount to keep Ukraine in the fight, rather than help them outright win. We are told this is to avoid a Russian escalation against NATO, and perhaps that does come into the calculation, but as I'm sure the defense lobbyists in the Western government buildings know, the longer this war goes on, the more money they will make. But, as always, foreign policy will stir up controversial debate amongst people. While some argue that the impact of the military-industrial complex ensures a strong national defense and robust defense industry, others believe it fuels unnecessary arms races, militarizes foreign policy, and hinders diplomatic solutions to conflicts. Again, this is a colossal question we're asking, and we don't pretend to have the answers. So, once again, we ask, what say you? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. To those of you who made it this far, thank you so much. You are officially promoted to 3-star YouTube General. You've earned it. Now, if you feel that we've also earned a little pat on the back, then a sub to the channel would be the ultimate enlistment, and we shall salute you. Also, do check out some of our other videos, like this one on your screen right now. Make sure you stay tuned to the channel and that notification bell isn't doing you dirty, making you miss out on more deep dives and extensive videos on topics just like this one. We'll catch you all in the next video. Hey, whoa, watch out for that!